So I have my completed accent panel and my completed main panel. I've laid my accent panel on my table so that it's long ways on to me, with the velcro on the left hand side. Now I'm not sure if on the video this doesn't actually turn things round, because I'm using an app where I can pause things. It tends to show everything back to front, but I've laid the accent panel on the table with the velcro to the left of me. I've taken my main panel and I'm putting it more or less directly above, and the pocket, I've just put some things in the pocket so you can see. The pocket opening is to the right, it's facing to the right, so I'm going to take those pieces out because I don't need those in there, and I'm literally going to take that panel and pull it over the one below so that the pocket is still facing to the right and the velcro is at the left end, and I'm just going to line those edges up, and I'm going to clip all the way around the outside. Now you can pin if you prefer. I don't actually really have very many pins because I don't use many pins in my normal bag sewing, so I'm a bit of a, I just prefer clips. I just know where I'm at with a clip. And you'll notice that I'm clipping all round the outside, but I'm not clipping this end where the velcro is, and you'll see why in a second. So having clipped them together, I'm then just going to turn them over. And now I can see the back of the stitching where my velcro is. So at the end where your velcro is stitched on, we are going to, and I say in the pattern I tell you to pop a pin in, but I actually find it's just as easy to make a mark 2.5 inches up from the short edge. Just make a mark on both sides. It is an approximation, it doesn't have to be perfect. What I'm going to get you to do is to excuse me, is to stitch all the way up the long side, across the top and down the long side to that 2.5 inch mark. So I'm going to pause the video, take you to the machine, and we're going to do that stitching. Okay, so we're now going to do the stitching that goes from the 2.5 inch mark all the way round back to the 2.5 inch mark we made on the other side. Our seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch, so that's 3/8 of an inch or 10 millimeters, whichever you prefer. They're both the same, they're just one's metric, one's imperial. So back stitch just at the beginning. And you can stitch all the way down one side, stitching the two pieces together, the main and the accent fabric. Try and keep your seam allowance nice and even, because when you try to fit your pieces of card in, if you don't stick to the seam allowance, you'll find that either they won't fit or it'll be baggy. So all the way down the long side. Right to the bottom. Pivot at the bottom. We're coming along the shorter end now. Again, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Don't deviate. Pivot at the other corner and back down the other side. shouldn't be going over the pocket, so the pocket's not within this seam. This is a really easy thing to sew because you're not going across any really thick bits here. And back down to that 2.5 inch mark that you made on the other side. Back stitch a couple of times, and you can see that's completed. Right, we're going to go to these top corners and we're going to trim off the top corners. Be careful not to cut into our stitching. And then we're going to turn, I'm just going to move the camera back a little bit here. We're going to turn through the right way. So pop your hand inside. Pull through. Make sure you poke out your corners. Do that with a pair of scissors. If you want to use thicker fabrics for this, then you can do. I've used decor weight fabrics very successfully, not a problem. So having poked out all your corners, oops, daisy, got a bit of fluff there. Let's grab the ironing pad. And we're going to give this a good press. Now just roll the seams between your fingers to ensure that the accent fabric is behind and the main fabric is on the front. And do this slowly. I know this is only a craft project, but you want it to look as best as it can, especially if you're doing them for craft fairs and what have you. And these are really good for craft fairs. They sell really well. And they're so quick and easy to make. You can do these kind of conveyor belt fashion. And there's minimal outlay because they don't take a lot of fabric. It's the card that's the thing. You can go and raid your local supermarket to get card. I've got a thread there, which I need to get rid of. So just keep rolling that side seam so that you know that you've got the accent fabric is on the reverse and the main fabric is on the front. That's particularly important along the side of those pockets because I think it looks tatty if you don't do it properly. Just keep coming down. And as you get towards the bottom, let me just turn this round so you can see easier, where we haven't got the stitching, just make sure that that's seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch is just, even though it's not stitched, is just pressed in. On both sides. So let me just so from the top you wouldn't actually know that those bottom bits haven't actually been stitched. They look like they've been stitched because you've folded in the seam allowance on both sides. Give it a really good press. You want it to look really sharp. that's that stage completed. I like to turn it over and press it from the other side as well, just to be on the safe side. Just to make sure that everything's exactly where it needs to be. Be careful pressing Velcro, it melts if you're not careful, and that's not good. So just be careful if you're putting your iron onto the Velcro. You can just kind of whip it across very gently, but just don't leave it on there for any length of time. Okay, so that's that bit completed, and I'll be back to you with the next stage. So we have our fully pressed and stitched all around the outside tablet stand. Now we're going to make a line across the closed end, so the end that doesn't have the open pieces. We're going to make that 1.25 inches. Away from the edge. I am just going to double check that measurement because yes, it is 1.25 inches. Suddenly had a moment of blankness and thought, I don't think it is. And we're going to stitch along that line, stitching through both layers of fabric. So yeah, you can hardly see the stitching because I'm using a coloured thread that's the same as the actual thing itself. Then you're going to need your other piece of hook and loop, and you're going to place it centrally in that 1.25 inch space that you've just created. So just pop it so that it's equidistant between the top and the bottom. And then you're going to stitch it in place. And you can either clip it or pin it, or you can just go for it and stitch it the same as I do. Let's just fold those other bits out of the way so you can see what I'm doing. So it doesn't have to be, you can eyeball this, I eyeball it. So again, stitching on that sort of flat edge around the outside. And if you don't have, this is 25mm or maybe even 20mm, let me just double check. This is a metric, this is an imperial ruler, I don't know. But it doesn't matter either way, 20 or 25 will work. If you've got thicker width-wise in Velcro, then you can cut it down. It needs to sit nicely within that 1.25 inch space that you created at the end with the line of stitching. And I'm doing this on the main fabric, not the accent fabric. So this is on the main fabric side. The back stitches at the end, and then we have our second piece of Velcro in place. So the second piece of Velcro in place, the pockets are in place, and everything's hunky-dory. Now this is where we start to construct. The first thing I'm going to do is remove my normal foot and put a zipper foot on, if I can find one in my pot of feet. That will do. because now we're going to be stitching very close to some edges. So we're going to take our first piece of cardboard and we are going to insert it into the open end. Now this should fit perfectly, it should be a snug fit. Notice I use the boobage to push this through. I'm sure that's not a technical thing to do with one's boobs, but if you've got them, you might as well use them. And you're kind of sliding it on. You need to slide it on from both sides. And I don't know why this reminds me of something that I used to do at school, when we did at school with bananas, and I'm not going to go too deeply into that. I know it was quite hilarious when I was at school. So push it in until it's right up against that line of stitching. So you've got this flappy bit and your cardboard is right into the stitching. And from the main fabric side, make sure that you stitch this from the main fabric side. Take your panel to your machine and put the zipper foot right up against the edge. Now if it makes it easier for you, score a line along the edge, but what you're going to do is you're going to stitch as close to the very edge of that piece of cardboard as you possibly can. This should be a nice snug fit, and if you need to, you might need to just I don't know if you can see that, just maneuver it so that the fabric seam is right along the side of your cardboard. Now if your cardboard is too thick, you may need to trim just a fraction off of the width. Don't trim anything off the length though, to get it in comfortably. If it's too thin, you may have a bit of a gap either side. It's a very difficult thing to call because everybody's cardboard is likely to be a slightly different size, but generally speaking you can trim off a little bit if it's a bit thicker. You can't add any if it's a bit thinner, but it won't matter. So done a couple of back stitches at the beginning, holding on to the machine, to the fabric rather, and making sure that it stays nice and tight. And the cardboard is nice and snugly fitted into that tube of fabric that we've made. We're just going to stitch right the way across as close to the cardboard as we can. And back stitch at the other end. I'm going to get rid of my thread. And you can see because the foot is pushing the fabric down, you end up with what looks like a bit of a step, and that's fine because that's what's going to allow the thing to bend properly. So, wild guess, we're going to pop a second piece of cardboard in. Again, carefully feeding it in, making sure that it's nice and straight, and push it up so that it butts up against the stitch line that you've just done. And your pocket should be sitting nicely on that that panel. Push it up, push it in. Golly, this sounds like some sort of a adult entertainment channel. Again, make sure the seams are nicely on the side, and stitch along the bottom as close as you can to the edge of your cardboard. Our second line of stitching. So far I don't have any stitching, so I've obviously run out of bobbin thread. Wonderful. Let's just, no I haven't. Wonder why it hasn't stitched. I'm going to go back and do it again. idea why that hadn't stitched. Very strange. Get rid of any stray ones. And the postman is just about to come to the door, so I'm going to pause you and I'll come back in a second once I've spoken to the postman, because he's got a parcel for me. How marvellous. Okay, sorry about that, ladies. It won't be any big surprise for you to realise that we're going to put the third piece of cardboard in. And again, sliding it up to the previous stitch line. Pull the fabric out, check the side seams are sitting nicely on the sides of that cardboard. And again, I'm just going to fold this out of the way so you can see and I don't hit my tripod. Making sure it's pushed right in, we're going to stitch across as close to that piece of cardboard side, the side of the cardboard, as we can. Just a couple of back stitches at the beginning. Rid of my threads. So now we have 3 pieces of card inserted, and you can kind of start to see how it's going to come together. So now I need my ironing pad again. I've got some threads there that I need to remove. So we're now on the accent side, so the side where we have the velcro and we have our open ends. Remember, we press those side pieces in by 3/8 of an inch. Now what we're going to do, and this isn't overly exact, is we are going to make a fold that is approximately 1/2 inch in that bottom, and we're going to fold both of those pieces over so that we've actually got a hem of the main fabric on the bottom. It doesn't really matter if it's not quite 1/2 inch, as long as it's straight. And I'm just going to press that in place. Now you'll notice that because of the way we've added extra bits and layers, your accent fabric is now slightly longer, so you've got an excess of it. And all we're going to do is we're going to take that fold that we've just created, and we're going to take it and we're going to pop it up against the stitch line that we've got, and we're going to pop a clip in. We've got a thread on there, both ends, to hold it in place. Got a few stray threads. Right, now get rid of the ironing pad because I don't need that. I'm going to stitch down one side, and I've turned mine over because I've got black thread in my bobbin and I haven't changed it. And I'm just going to stitch down from the edge of the cardboard to the very end of the panel, as nicely and closely to the edge as I can. My machine has decided to move. I didn't mean to do that. So I'm going to basically stitch all of the layers together, and I'm literally stitching that at about 1/8 of an inch, so you don't need to worry too much about it being perfect. This is because I've got black bobbin thread and I really should have purple bobbin thread, so I'm just going to I'm just stitching down from the top side. It's a lot easier if you do it from the underside, to be fair, from the reverse. So I've stitched down one end to close up that end, except for I haven't, because I haven't caught the fabric on the bottom. That's because I'm using a zipper foot, which doesn't really work well. So let's pop my ordinary foot back on if I can find it, and we'll do that again because Christine's making a pig's ear of it. So let's do that again. Let's make sure that my fabrics are all together, which they are, and it's better when you've got a foot on that actually can do the job. You are going through quite a lot of layers here. That's better. Now I've stitched all of them together. And let's get rid of my... Now, if you've thought about it and you've got the right colour bobbin thread, I'd say turn it over and stitch all the way down the edge of that folded edge. Because I haven't got the right colour bobbin thread, I'm actually going to do it from this side, which is not ideal, but I am going to do it from this side because I'm just too lazy to change my bobbin thread. At the end. So now I've done a line of stitching across, which basically is holding my fold closed. So you can see I've stitched right the way along the edge, and I've still got an opening, which I have now got my finger stuck into. This is where you need your wadding and something to poke it with. Now here's my super duper pokey tool. Sometimes they're referred to as wooden spoons, but I believe that this is a sewing implement as opposed to a cooking implement. So in the hole that you've left, you're going to poke your wadding. Now you can use wadding, stuffing, you could even probably use cotton wool if it really pleased you to do so. A piece of wooden doweling would work. And you're going to push it in. And depending on how thick your cardboard is and how, I'm just going to tear a bit off rather than using a great big lump like that, and how closely you've stitched to the sides of your cardboard will depend on exactly the size that you have for this piece. Some, if I've used thinner cardboard, I end up with a slightly bigger sort of tube. I'm not making a very good job of this. I think it's because I'm doing it back to front. That's better. I'm doing it back to front because I'm concerned that you can't see what I'm doing on the video. So I use my pokey to push it in. And let's grab a bit more. It's easier to do with smaller amounts than it is to do with great big lumps. And I'm pushing it in because I want it to be quite firm. So push it in until you've got a really nice solid I think that can probably go down a bit further. So yeah, I mean I can get a bit more in. You need it to be nice and solid, because this is going to hold your tablet, your iPad, your Android device, phone, whatever. They're also quite useful in the kitchen to put a cookbook on. I've never had one of those stands. Not that I use a cookbook very often, but there are occasions where I like to use a recipe. So you can pop a cookbook onto them as well. They're quite useful. It's quite useful for that. So once you've got this bit wadded out as best as you can, and you just need to push it as much in as you can so that it gets nice and firm. What I like to do is just, once I've got it all in, is just give it that little extra, I think I can get a bit more in, a little extra push, so that I've got a gap at the side, because we are going to close this gap in a minute. Okay, that feels about as full as it's going to get, I think. It's a nice hard ridge along the front. So, having put my wadding in, you can see the wadding is literally poking out because there's so much in there. I'm just going to give it an extra shove so that I can get these edges together, and then I'm going to stitch that edge closed. Let me just, so hold it together and stitch, and I'm stitching from the front back because that way I know I'm not going to get a pucker. You just need to be able to push the wadding in ½ an inch just so that it's not in the way when you're stitching this side closed. So that's that nice and closed. I've still got threads on the back. We'll go along and remove those. Then what you can do is you can kind of, if you roll that front bit in your hands, you can kind of move the stuffing so that it goes back into that end that you've just removed it from. And there we have it. That front bit is done. You can fold your velcro over, place it on there like that, and your iPad stand is complete. And it looks super. So there we have it, one iPad stand. Now you can pop your iPad, you could use it for, pop your rulers on it. You can do whatever you want with it, really. They're fabulous. Pop your scissors and stuff in the back. Have your pokey tools and whatever else you want to do. It's just fab. Fab, great fun for Christmas presents, great fun for whatever you want to do, really. So there we are, Epsilon tablet stand completed.